The power of storytelling, and even that statement you made, Erin, that data does not necessarily change minds. Story and emotion changes minds. Well, hello and welcome to the Leadership Growth Hour, everyone, an interactive monthly event that features timely leadership topics and tools to grow your leadership performance. I'm your host, Daniel Stewart, executive consultant and coach, and president of Stewart Leadership, a global consulting, coaching, and training firm aligning organizations on leadership, teaming, change, and talent. In short, we develop the people side to enable your growth strategies. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a leadership presence expert, Erin Ellis, executive consultant and coach at Stewart Leadership. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Daniel. So nice to be here.
Great to have you join us. Okay, folks, so as many of you know, the show is divided into two parts. The first half is content conversation on a specific leadership topic. The second part is open Q&A from the audience, continuing on the same topic or on other topics as needed. As we are talking, please write your questions and comments in the Q&A feature. Now on to today's focus area, building your executive presence and influence. Okay, Erin, first question for you to get this started. So this term executive presence, it's been around for a few decades. The meaning behind it, how we've looked at it, has shifted from a more traditional view to, well, what we can think of it differently. What has it started from, and what are we kind of looking at it today in a different viewpoint? Talk to us about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So this term executive presence, I feel like has been around for a very long time without a real strong definition. But if I had to put a definition to it from, I don't know, say 5, 10, 20 years ago, typically it's thought of kind of external only, appearance, dressing for success, bringing gravitas to communications, all about really somebody's image. And since then, it's really evolved over the years. And I'm happy to actually share with you and the folks today, we have a nice model and definition to bring this to life. So would you mind sharing a slide, and I could take everyone through it? Yes. So this is the model we've been using to work with leaders and emerging leaders to really strengthen and develop their executive presence or leadership presence. So this first quadrant in the green, which is how you show up, this is, I would say, what we thought of executive presence in a more traditional sense, but really appearance and dress, or I dressed for success, as we have called it in the past, is really only a small component of it. As we've evolved this definition of how you show up, it's more about your authentic leadership image, having confidence, being an effective communicator, listening effectively, being available to people. So it's all about your personal brand and confidence. The second area, if you will, to go a little bit deeper, having leadership presence is also about how you decide. So being a leader is about delivering excellence, but are you involving key stakeholders? Are you making decisions effectively to deliver results? And then this third area here in the blue, right hand lower, this manage emotions. This is a key component that I would say is newer to this model and this concept of executive presence or leadership presence, particularly, I would say, in the last 5 years. I'd be curious to hear what the audience thinks about this. And this is all about having that high emotional intelligence, being able to show empathy, manage our ego, value others, create a feedback culture in the organization. And then lastly, the purple at the bottom is all about how you inspire. How do you rally the troops around a compelling vision and purpose? How do you instill risk-taking in others to do their best? How do you create a high-performance environment? Components for each of these quadrants that intersect with others. So they are not mutually exclusive. There's definitely some overlap. But this comprehensive model or definition allows us to really dig into actionable ideas that we can take on and improve our executive presence.
So, Erin, let's go back here. So this traditional viewpoint, as you've pointed out, it's often that first quadrant, which is really how you show up. At least traditionally, it's the visual cues. And
correct.
What drives me crazy, and it's the reality that we live in, is it's usually been tall, talkative, a guy, often white, aged in some way, all of these very visible, superficial, externally focused, traditional, power structured kind of things.
Yeah.
And that's where oftentimes we have in our mind, and we may focus on this. And what you're saying is, no, we want to, not only do we want to, but we can get far beyond that and expand the way we look at what executive presence, what leadership presence and influence can look like, because it really goes much farther than the outside, and it goes deeper. Is that overstating it, or is that a fair way of putting it?
No, that's not overstating it. In fact, when we talk about this particular area of how you show up, external appearance is a blip. It's more about as to how do you establish confidence? How do you establish your own authentic brand, your brand to others? How do you listen effectively? If I can dive into this one a bit. So listening effectively is so important. I think this particular area has been a lost skill over the last couple of years, because we've been driven to distraction with being on, hybrid environment, Zoom, multitasking. Think about, let me give you this. Think about somebody that you've been either working with professionally or personally, who when you're engaging with them, you feel like you're the most important person, right? That is how you show up. And it has nothing to do with the traditional description you just gave. It's all about how that person is making you feel in the moment through making good eye contact, not interrupting you, adapting their body language to be open, confirming that they are understanding what you're saying, mirroring back, being curious. So these are skills that we can all kind of lean into to show up in the way that we want others to see us, which is a present leader.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And what this begins to help is to identify and define something that is so often mysterious. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with executives to be able to then, they'll say, can you just help somebody, get them a sense of confidence? I don't know how to describe it. They just have that missing element. And then as I'll start describing this kind of a framework, they'll be like, oh yeah, that. Yes, that's it. And so it gives something, some language, other than it's just this mysterious X factor that somehow is missing to be able to then provide that sense of being present, this ability to influence.
Can I give a confidence hack for the audience? Because I think this is, since you opened the door, I'll take it. So Dr. Amy Cuddy, for those of you who are, if you're not familiar with her work, I seriously recommend taking a look. Cuddy, Amy Cuddy. She has studied building confidence through body language. And one particular study that she has done is looked at body language through power poses. So kind of, sitting up tall, maybe making yourself big, adopting a pose that feels powerful, and then going into whatever high pressure, stressful situation you might have to do, right? So really it's reconfiguring your brain through a bit of a body language adjustment to project more assertiveness and confidence. So it's fascinating. Highly recommend it. We could put it in the notes. It's one of the most watched TED Talks, but that is a quick life hack that you could do to just if you want to portray more confidence, do a power pose before you go into a stressful situation.
I love it. And it doesn't seem to be just for like an in-person thing, but even a remote or virtual, you could help yourself get a little more confident versus the kind of cuddled up, secluded, which sometimes we'll do without realizing it.
Yes. So just on that point, one of the researches that she notes in this TED Talk is the interview. What do you do before an interview? You might hunch over, sitting in your chair waiting. You might look at your phone. You're making yourself small. And so she looked at, they looked at people who did that versus power posing, and the interviewers had no idea who was who. And of course, they wanted to hire all the power posing people. Yes.
Oh, this is so good. Okay. I'd love to ask a question for all those who are listening here. So it's on this next slide. And I'm going to read this question for people to be thinking about this. All right. We just went through these 4, and we can go through them again as you're thinking through this. Which of these 4 areas of executive presence would you want to focus on in the next 6 months? In the Q&A, write down which of these 4, and I'm going to go back on the slide, but I'll read through these 4. Might it be how you show up? Might it be how you decide? Might it be how you manage emotions, or how you inspire? Because all 4 are elements to then impact how you influence and your overall presence. And we're starting to see some responses. Again, think about the next 6 months, your position, whatever it is, or your next position, if that's coming up soon. What would you want to emphasize and focus in on? And as I'm talking, we're seeing a lot of comments here. Erin, what are you seeing pop up here?
Yeah, lots of how you decide, manage emotions, how you inspire. Yes, decide, inspire, manage. I mean, all over the board, really. I think it's a well-balanced distribution.
Oh, Erin, talk for a moment around this manage emotion. Sometimes my stress shows. How often do you hear that as you work with executives?
Oh, all the time. All the time. This is so manage emotions and inspire are probably the top 2 that I hear the most, where executives that I work with or emerging leaders I work with want to focus on, just because it is so easy to get emotionally hijacked, right? It is just, I mean, just to act or show up in a way in a response to a stressful situation when you later regret it. Right. So let's think of how many times we've done that today, yesterday. And so we're all human. It happens. And so really working through that is something that can be so powerful in especially among in the workplace. So that is a very common one. And how you inspire too. How you inspire has also become a very hot topic of folks who they want to make improvements. Daniel, can I flip it to you?
Ooh, okay.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on these areas as far as just reflecting on what you may want to improve on, or others that you work closely with?
Yeah, that's a good one. I've been reflecting on this, and so I have these 2 roles. One role is with clients, leading in projects or doing executive coaching work, especially with senior leaders. And so there's that one role, showcasing influence and presence. And the other is having the privilege of leading Stewart Leadership with all these great consultants and coaches. And as I reflect on both of those, I focus so much and want to continue to focus around managing emotion, managing my reactions, because there can be all sorts of input, and I could be tired, I could be feeling overwhelmed, but I want to make sure my reactions show up as my best self, regardless of how much stress or how fatigued or all the craziness that's going around, because the other person deserves that. And being honest about it while being able to manage, because I can't control all that comes in, but I can manage to a certain degree, as best I can, my reactions out of myself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I try to pay attention to.
As you're talking, Daniel, what struck me and what you're explaining, kind of different roles, wearing different hats. In the last couple of years, as I've been working through this model with leaders, what they say to me almost every single time is, wow, these skills, these strategies can be applied not only at work, but personally too. And that's just such an aha moment for them when they realize, oh, I can develop a better leadership presence in my family, in my personal life too. So it's versatile, these skills.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start making this practical. Well, what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to look for each quadrant, Erin.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, what are specific things, actions, areas to focus and emphasize? And as we go through this, folks who are listening, please bring out some questions for yourself, as well as be thinking of a person with whom you work who may benefit from some of this. Be thinking about, if they were able to then take advantage of, some of these are skill building, some of these are habit shaping, and some of these are mindset reshaping. And so some of these things, be thinking about this and what you might be able to do to take away some of these ideas for yourself, but also for others in your organization as well. So let's see here. I'm going to jump ahead. I think we've got this next one. So as we jump into this first quadrant, Erin, there's so many aspects. And again, this is more the traditional viewpoint.
Right.
What would you view, though? What would you recommend we emphasize and do around this one, how we show up?
Right. So I think we started talking about this one already, I believe, where, I gave the example of the how to project confidence and actively listening. But if I were to go on one important thing in this area, it's active listening. It's listening effectively. When we actively listen, it's a huge component of effective communication, and it contributes to building trust. It's a secret weapon to build trust. And so lots of things can happen, right? You're showing validation of the other person, respect. You're creating environment for openness and transparency. You're able to show empathy and connection, which is part of the managing emotions. So there's overlap there. So it's a rapport building, skill. And so active listening, just to boil it down into some very specific things, it's resisting. This is a big one that leaders struggle with: resisting the urge to jump in when they have a thought in their head, or to stop listening when they have a thought in their head because they want to get their thought out. How many of us have done that, right? Where our mind stops paying attention and we're thinking about what we want to say next, or we're thinking about our grocery list. So that's one thing. Minimizing interruptions. So anything that we could do to control, our distractions intentionally.
You're holding up your phone for all those who are listening. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Yeah. Holding up my phone. Anything we can do intentionally to combat distractions. And then just a third thing is practicing mirroring back. So, Daniel, you tell me you're telling me a story, for example, and I say, wow, you sound frustrated, Daniel, and you could say, no, I'm not frustrated. I'm this. And you can, you can either correct me or you can agree with me. So kind of showing that you're in tune to the underlying message. So those are just some things.
Erin, tremendous insight. Let's build on this. There was a question that's been asked around how does one then show up and address some of these biases that we have? And recognize the biases are real and are not easily overcomable. That's not what they wrote, but that's the word I'm using. Not despite how well we dress up our differences. What are your thoughts, Erin, around, especially in this quadrant, how we show up to address and acknowledge biases and manage dealing with them in real ways? Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, that's the first step, is acknowledging and being aware if you're coming into a conversation or a situation with biases, right? So keeping an open mind, resisting judgment, resisting your willfulness to want to say the thing you want to say, and reserving that till you understand the other person's point of view, are ways that you can really silence is a very key strategy in active listening. You learn so much when you're able to control or pause in what some people think is awkward silence, which it is, but it's so powerful. Those are a couple. I would love to know your thoughts or others.
Yeah, this silence component, especially within the urgency, the tyranny of the urgency within, we have so much going on.
Yeah.
And yet the power of the silence, as you're talking through this, I keep thinking of how can we pause long enough to ask ourselves, what am I not considering before I respond? Because oftentimes our knee-jerk reaction, that is going to be laced with every bias that we have, because it's just going to come straight from the gut, straight from the first thing. And oftentimes, after a second or two of thinking, that's what enables us to get past that first reaction that might be laden with our initial biases, because we all have them. That's what and they can be helpful at certain times, unhelpful in other times.
Yeah.
And how can we acknowledge them, take them out of our minds, look at them, and then say, is this helpful here? Yeah. What else am I not considering that I can get past? But just enabling us to have that second to say, what else can I consider? Yeah. From another viewpoint. But that is so hard to do at times.
It is. But if we can master that pause, it will benefit us in the long run. So let's all try to master the pause in the next week when we feel that we want to jump to a conclusion.
I love it. Okay, so this is the first quadrant.
Yes.
Fantastic specific things to look at in terms of how we show up, far more than simply dress, because so many of the things you've emphasized really is inside, how we are present, how we're expressing confidence, and how we're being attentive in conversation, really.
That's right.
So as we then look at this next one, this decision-making, which is an interesting way of looking at influence. And I think, correct me here, Erin, it's not so much the decision itself, it's what leads up to the decision, who is involved, as well as who is communicated, who's then involved after as well to create this buy-in. It's this whole decision-making process that you can then express and build influence. What are some key things to emphasize for this part?
That's right. That's right, Daniel. It's this notion that people support what they build, right? What they help build. And so, the two areas I would like to call out are actually the ones highlighted here, which is, this process of actually clearly defining a decision first, right? A problem well defined is a problem half solved. Okay. So, executive presence does require clear and concise communication, and being able to come together to define a problem first will help prevent us from jumping to solutions without thoughtful consideration, or it allows us to involve the correct and appropriate stakeholders as well. So similarly, with involving others, it's also about how are you involving them? How are you asking the question? So maybe I'll give you an example. Maybe you're in a situation where you know the right decision, but you need to get folks on board, and you're facilitating a meeting. Go around, involve others, and ask, what do you think? The 4 magic words. What do you think? And invite dissent too. When you're decision making and you're involving others, how can you create psychological safety by poking holes in the decision by saying, what are we not considering? Help me pressure test this. Poke holes in this for me. So inviting dissent. So 2 things: asking the question, what do you think? And in many different forms, and inviting dissent into the decision-making while you're involving stakeholders will help with that influence and ultimately that buy-in into the decision when you're ready to communicate and implement the decision. So
That's fantastic.
I guess the 2 takeaways there is define the problem first, and don't go into solution mode. And then how are you going to involve others? Even if you know the right answer.
So build on this, Erin, because sometimes a leader might say to him or herself, I have the right answer. Why do I have to work with these people? It's just a waste of time. And my response often is, that is leader work. That is the exact work of a leader. It is not necessarily to be right. It is to then be able to inspire and to create a collective. And that is work. That is the work of leaders. Erin, how do you express that, though? How do you help a leader recognize that is not a waste of time?
I would simply say they can't implement the decision on their own. They can't do it on their own. They need others to support it, to align to it, to implement it, to be their ambassador of communication. They can't do it on their own. So they need to involve others, because the downstream effects of decisions don't just fall on one person.
As a reminder, folks who are listening, for yourself or for others in your organization, feel free to type in questions, things you'd like us to talk through, address in any way. We'll be happy to address some of your questions as we're continuing to talk through executive presence and influence. Before we leave this quadrant, Erin, I wanted to ask you another question on this defining a problem. If, as you work with so many senior executives as well, as they ask, okay, fine, I've heard that so many times. What is a good way of doing it? Huh, Erin? What's a good way of defining a problem effectively, quickly? What do you say? What's a good way of doing it?
So there's one strategy that I think is very effective, which is starting with a big brainstormed sentence of what your problem is, right? Just blurt it all out. It could be your problem could be an elephant, right? Too big to boil down into a specific definition. Take what you wrote down. Now try to cut the words in half. So write it down, kind of free form. Now cut it in half. Now cut that in half until you get down to something between 4 and 6 words to simply define your problem. So what that does, you start big and you kind of you whittle it down to just the essence of it. It can help you narrow down to be able to articulate in 5 words, for example, what the problem is, or it can also cause you to realize in that defining problem, ooh, there's actually 2 problems here. So, or more than 2. Maybe we have 3, 4, 5 different work streams of defined problem, hence defined decision-making needed here. So it helps give us clarity.
That winnowing down, it also defines the scope. It just then simplifies and focuses.
Yes.
Okay, as we then look at this next quadrant, this emotion, there's been a lot of focus, emotional intelligence, so much around this emotional element that used to, of course, not necessarily be discussed as much. We discuss it a lot now.
Yeah.
Now we are putting it into this approach, further defining it around executive presence influence. What are the specifics? What would you recommend to emphasize around this element?
Yeah, there's so much in this element, Daniel, that I love. I love creating a feedback culture. I love the notion of valuing others. But for purposes of just picking one thing for today's call or for today's session, I'm gonna focus on leadership EQ, or emotional intelligence. And so for those who do not know, I'm going to give you a quick overview. And for those who do know, I would highly recommend diving into the topic further by looking at Daniel Goleman's work. But so there's actually 5 components here of emotional intelligence. So the first one, this is why I'm picking this as the biggest area here, is self-awareness. First, self-awareness. It's the ability to essentially recognize and understand our moods, our emotions, our drives, and as well as that effect on others. Second is self-regulation. This is that ability we were talking about earlier to control or redirect our impulses or moods, that or the ability to think before acting, I should say, to control that emotional hijack. Self-motivation. This is understanding our passion for what we do that go beyond money or status. Why do we pursue what we do? Why are we motivated to do what we do? Fourth one is empathy and social awareness. This is the ability to understand and care about others. And then lastly, social skills. This is understanding there is extreme strength in managing our relationships and building our networks to find common ground and manage conflict and disagreements. So I know there's a lot to emotional intelligence, but I know you're going to ask me for a strategy here, right?
You guessed it, right? Exactly.
That's where we go with so self-regulation. Back to that. That's the ability to control our impulses. So when I talk to leaders about this area, it's first and foremost, it's understanding what triggers us, what sets us off. Some of us know the answer right away. Answers I've received are, not being valued, or getting surprised by something, or not having bad, poor work being done, or other people getting credit for poor work and not, excellent work. Just some examples. So I say first understand your triggers, what sets you off, because when you understand them, then you can, again, we go back to the pause. It's all about pausing and understanding how you can pause that emotional hijack and redirect. How do you want to think, feel, and act differently than what your impulse tells you want to do? So it's kind of the strategy here is reframing the story. How can I think, feel, and act differently about a stressful situation?
And when do you do that? When do you advise leaders to do that? Is that a daily practice? Is that in the moment? Is that a reflecting once a month kind of thing?
Yeah.
When does that happen to reframe?
Well, I would say it depends. The answer certainly depends. If there was a situation where they did not show up as their best self, I would say it's doing that exercise as an immediate reframe after the fact is advisable. Because what's going to happen is if you reframe the story and think about, okay, how could I have thought, felt, and acted differently? And you write it down. When we write things down, it translates to our brain and translates to our actions in the future. And so we kind of rewire ourselves to think, feel, and act differently in the future. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I'll answer, Daniel, just as a general answer, is EQ, emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, can be built no matter how old we are and no matter where we are in our career. It's a muscle that can be built and practiced every single day. Every single day. So while IQ taps out about, I don't know the actual age, EQ we can grow it our whole life. And so I will say I heard this once, you get hired for IQ, you get fired for EQ. So managing it is important.
And so here's a hard one for you, Erin. This reframing activity, as powerful as it is, can it be done alone? And is it effective alone? And I'm sure you can say it depends. So please explain.
It depends, Daniel. It depends. I mean, it's a good strategy. It's figuring out, I would say it's figuring out your coping mechanism to pause, whatever's going to allow you to pause. So other strategies, and I would love if folks could provide other strategies in the chat, are just walking away, taking an actual space, like leaving the room, taking a quick walk, calming yourself, breathing, sleeping on it if you can, if you're able to come back to the situation. That's a little bit a longer pause. But also, I love this one, it's a quick in the moment check. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said now? Do you think of that? 1, 2, 3. So some sort of a strategy, whatever's going to work for you, to just have that pause and rethink the situation before you act in a way that you're going to regret later.
Oh, so good. Okay. Let's move on to this fourth
Yes.
area around this inspiration to inspire others, applicable to so many. What does that mean? What does that look like, especially in a practical way? How would you define that? Yeah.
So 2 things I'll call out here, highlighted, communicating a compelling vision. So another resource I'll reference here is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Again, this is also one of the most watched YouTubes, which is How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And the premise here is simply start with why. A lot of us communicate from the outside in, as Simon says, meaning, hey, here's what I do and here's how I do it. Or here's what we're doing and here's how we're going to do it. So you name it, and whether you're introducing yourself, whether you're trying to sell an idea, it's the what and the how is typically how we communicate. But if we start with why, here's why we're doing something. Here's what we believe. Here's how we're going to get it done. And this just happens to be what it is. So it's a very compelling way to kind of change your language and to align people to your vision, which essentially a vision is the why. People love to know the why.
And Erin, I'm just going to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
So you do a very good job of this, even as you're working with clients, to say, yes, this is what I do, but this is why. Just give that quick statement just as an example to showcase the difference, if you don't mind.
I will do it. I'm going to try. So the example I give, and just simply introducing myself, seeing if you want to work with me. If I start from the outside in, which is the what and the how, I could say, I do executive consulting and coaching, and I tailor my solutions to meet your needs. Do you want to work with me? Maybe, right? If I start from the inside out, starting with why. I believe that we all have leadership potential. We just need to figure out a way to unleash it. I get to know your needs, and then I serve as an executive consultant and coach to you. Do you want to work with me? It's a little different. So that's an example of
switching it up. Yeah.
Switching it up.
I wanted to paint that picture. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And I think it's important. It's an important exercise just to make this actionable. Try it on, audience. Start with why. Why do you do what you do? How do you do it? And what do you do? So why, how, what? Try writing it out. Try introducing yourself that way next time. A little call to action.
I love it.
I want to hear back how it works.
Anything else, please? Yeah, dive into the other.
And then just one last thing. Storytelling has become such an impactful way to inspire. Gone are the days of data changing behavior. Data doesn't change behavior; emotions do. And so, a thought leader that I've been following closely on this is Erin Eber, EBER. She also has a TED Talk, and she does nothing but teaches leaders how to become better storytellers. And she advises, as you're creating the right story, figure out what's the context, what's the conflict, and what's the outcome. And sure, we can have data to back up whatever message we're trying to convey, but starting with a story is so much more memorable, impactful, and people remember how they feel, not all the data that was given to you in a presentation, for example. So how to tell a great story? Karen tells us first, real quick. Start with your message. What's the message you want to convey to your audience? The second one is mine your own experiences, because it's so much more impactful when you're telling the story from a first person. If you need to borrow somebody else's story, please do. But it's again, if you can, be the one to really say it and feel it, it's more impactful. Don't make yourself the hero. Highlight a struggle. So we want to be able to learn from a lesson, a mistake, a conflict. Keep it simple. You don't need to talk about on the third Tuesday of the month, this happened. Eliminate extraneous details and then practice it. Because again, the more we practice, the more we get comfortable and the more we can show confidence in our influence.
And the name, Karen Eber?
Eber, EBER. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. The power of storytelling, and even that statement you made, Erin, that data does not necessarily change minds. Story and emotion changes minds.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we have introduced a very different way of defining and framing and acting upon executive presence and influence. So here's the summing up question for you, Erin. What's the one thing that people can take away and act on? What's the one idea if they want to develop their ability to effectively influence others? What's the one thing they should really emphasize from all of our conversation today?
I had to boil it down to one thing to work on, it's active listening. Active listening is where it's at. And simply because active listening, I believe, is a secret weapon in building trust with others. And trust leads to influence.
And as we have a few more minutes before we wrap up, folks who are listening, please share any questions you have. There are a couple of other elements we can touch upon. One is this remote aspect. Many of these seem very logical in a face-to-face environment. Erin, as you work with so many different leaders, any comments you have in terms of how these apply to a remote or virtual setting? Is it yep, exactly apply? Or is there any considerations, any mindset that we would want to adapt or consider within a remote Teams, Zoom world as well that we should consider as we think of this executive presence influence idea?
Yeah. Well, I would say for the most part, it certainly applies, and I'll say, and your Zoom presence is what you have if that's all you have to deal with. So turn the camera on. Make sure you're using all you can within that frame to show your nonverbals, to show you're actively listening, to be present with others. That is a way you can up your game, and in a Zoom or a hybrid or a virtual environment, because frankly, having camera off is also a nonverbal signal and signals things to others. And it may or may not be the message you want to signal. So I think that's a consideration, and it's a very powerful one that we can use. So I think we could still use all the things, all the skills.
All the different ways to show up as best you can, for sure. Absolutely. And then within all of this, how does one adjust and adapt and consider the needs of the other person in all of this? How does that fit in terms of the different relationships? Because we all have a boss, we have a team, we have peers, we have others. How does that fit in to all of the things we've talked about then? How does that show up? What would you say as you comment on that?
Yeah, I would say it's always a good exercise to look at your key stakeholders that you interact with the most. So your boss, your peers, direct reports, if you have them, and your customers, and understand how you think they're perceiving you, right? So how are they perceiving you? And be honest, right? Take inventory, write it out. And if there's a gap, if you think there's a gap in what you want it to be, that's where you need to put more focus in that particular relationship. So doing a relationship mapping exercise like that can really help give us focus and strategy on how to build relationships. This goes back to managing emotions, because building relationships is part of that area. And so that gives us a way to not, I have to do better at building relationships and it's overwhelming. But then now you got some focus to it when you take inventory, so to speak, of all your key stakeholders.
Yeah. And building on this relationship, let's address this question, and then we'll wrap up here. There's a question here: how do you get frontline leaders to speak up with their peers? Because sometimes they might be reluctant for whatever reason. How do you help them voice their thoughts as they're with their peers more often? What would you say, Erin?
I saw that question, and I must say I struggled a bit to because it's a very broad question. So I'm not really sure how to answer that without knowing any context. I don't know if I can get context on that.
So it's a good question. Additional context. As you're thinking through, Erin, even without the context, what are some ways to consider? What are things to consider as one would want to think through how to even approach it, what would you say?
Well, I would. So a couple things with a broad brush. I would encourage if folks are having trouble speaking up or communicating to others, first step is understanding everyone's unique styles and motivations is a good place to start. For example, does somebody prefer email or text, or do they prefer in person, face to face? How do they prefer receiving information? Finding out those cues and preferences is helpful to gain confidence to be able to say, oh yeah, I know this person. They love if you just do a flyby and fly by their office and pop in and give information. Just using that as an example. So understanding unique styles, preferences, communications, utilizing the people that you have as intel. So again, that's a little bit of organizational savviness there. So using people that may know more about, can give you insight. How does so-and-so like to receive information? How can I get to know so-and-so better? So that's how I would start to address that.
I love it. And what you're getting at, Erin, is getting deeper to understand how people then process information, how they work, their styles, to get more specific at the individual, which really comes through many of the themes you've talked about all the hour here, which is really getting specific and being present with the other, whoever that might be, and being engaged with them. Erin, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Leadership Growth Hour. Great conversation.
Thank you, Daniel.
Always a pleasure. Okay, for our listeners, please note that our next monthly Leadership Growth Hour will be on September 13th at noon Central Time, when we will talk about how to welcome AI as a part of your team. We will be privileged to have AI technology expert Dr. Ellen Badeau to join us to talk about this important topic. To register for future Leadership Growth Hour events, please visit stewartleadership.com/events. We'd love to have you join us. Till next time, all the best, everybody. Take care.